The peer-reviewed literature, that really is the cornerstone of science. It's the altar at which we worship. Sometimes perhaps we worship a bit too much because we kind of assume that just because something has been in the peer-reviewed literature, it must be correct. Well, as with everything else in life, there are good publications, there are some very poor publications, and there are mostly mediocre publications. We, of course, tend to look at the ones that have great impact: New England Journal of Medicine, The Lancet, Journal of the American Medical Association, Journal of the American Chemical Society, Journal of Clinical Nutrition. And that's where we draw our information from. And it is as reliable as can be. Of course, people were interested in what happens to their bodies long before there was peer-reviewed literature. If we go back to the ancient Greeks in the time of Hippocrates, well, of course there was interest in food in those days as well, always has been. And Hippocrates coined the expression, "Let thy food be thy medicine." You know, we look at that today and we assume, yeah, of course, because food is the only raw material that ever goes into our body. But back in those days, they didn't know anything about chemistry or biology or physiology or the chemical composition of food. So that was quite an inventive idea to suggest that there was a link between what we ate and our health. Today, of course, we assume this to be so. Not everything that Hippocrates said was equally wise. For example, he thought that lettuce cooled the body and curbed the passions. We don't really have any evidence that it does that. He also thought that pigeon droppings were great for baldness. Mercifully, you didn't have to eat them. You would rub them on head, but as you can see from his personal evidence, didn't work very well. But he also suggested that flax was great for the intestines, which it is. It has a very, very strong laxative effect, which at times can be very important. So as you can see, we go back to the time of Hippocrates, and what we see is a mix of sense and nonsense. We see the pigeon droppings, and we see the flaxseed, the two sort of extremes. And we have the same kind of spectrum of information today. There's a lot of nonsense out there, but of course there's a lot of very, very credible information which we rely on. Hippocrates happened to have been correct about flax seeds. What an interesting bit of chemistry in the flaxseed. Most people, of course, don't feature flax seeds in their diet, but they are a staple in the health food business, and legitimately so, actually, because flax seeds contain compounds called omega-3 fats. Now, you may have heard about these because they have been talked about as the wonder products present in fish. The omega-3 fats that are found in flaxseed are actually not as good physiologically as the ones that are found in fish, but if you can't eat fish, they're second best. And they have been linked with a variety of beneficial effects, including reduction in risk of cardiac arrhythmia, and there have been even stories about feeding it to pregnant women, for example, and having them give birth to more intelligent children. But I can tell you that for every such positive study, there are others that criticize it. But nevertheless, omega-3 fats are something that we should think about in terms of incorporating into the diet. But flax seeds also contain compounds called lignans. And those are very interesting because they have estrogen-like properties. Now, we will refer to so-called phytoestrogens or plant-based estrogens periodically during our discussions because they are controversial chemicals. Estrogen, of course, is a naturally occurring substance in the body, and chemicals that have estrogen-like behavior can have very strong biological effects, both pro and con. Well, lignans apparently do have beneficial estrogen-like effects, and I'll mention that in a moment. But the flax seeds also contain all kinds of fiber, both soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. Now, fiber is the indigestible component of foods. So it isn't get broken down in the stomach or in small intestine. Fiber passes through to the colon where bacteria can manipulate it, break it down, and some of it then is absorbed, much of it is excreted. That's why it results in a laxative effect. The soluble fiber part is actually very interesting because it can reduce cholesterol. We will talk about that later as well. And the insoluble fiber has the beneficial effect of speeding substances through the gut and regulating us. So flax seeds are pretty interesting. Now I mentioned the lignans, which have estrogen-like properties. And anything that has estrogen-like properties is in fact controversial because it can be both good and bad depending on the dosage. Well, it turns out that there have been a number of studies done with lignans and their potential benefits. Many of these studies done by Dr. Lillian Thompson at the University of Toronto, who is kind of the guru in this particular area. And she has concluded that eating lignans, which are found in flaxseed, for example, can have an effect on breast cancer. Now, it is not a very dramatic effect. It turns out that the effect is seen only in premenopausal women who are overweight. But, that's not a small category of women. And these studies show that intake of flaxseed because of the lignans reduces the risk of breast cancer because there are breast cancers that are stimulated by the body's overproduction of estrogen, and the lignans seem to block those estrogen receptors. It's not a miracle, but one can make good arguments for sprinkling flaxseed on top of your cereal every morning, of course, with fruit in between the cereal and the flaxseed. But, people don't want sort of subtle hints about health. They want information about miracles. They want to live forever by doing simple things. Unfortunately, we can't present anything like that because it doesn't exist. There are no geese out there that lay golden eggs. Miracles are very, very hard to come by. There are good diets and there are bad diets, but it's hard to tell the difference between them. Of course, we can talk about which components should be present in a good diet and which in a poor diet, but people want to be told that there's this certain food that is going to produce only good things and this component that is going to kill you. It doesn't work like that. So our emphasis will be looking at overall diets, and yes, they can be good or bad, but there are no miracles, no geese that lay golden eggs. However, interestingly enough, there are some chickens that do lay golden eggs, at least for the farmer, who is selling those eggs as omega-3 eggs. Well, here's an interesting little nutritional story. How did this come about? Well, as you know, eggs have a checkered history. They have been linked with heart disease because the egg yolk contains a lot of cholesterol, about 300 milligrams, and high blood levels of cholesterol have been linked to heart disease. Of course, that is not the same thing as saying that eggs are linked to heart disease. And there's a lot of controversy about that as well, which we'll address later on. But in any case, the public perception is that eggs are dangerous. So egg marketers, of course, are concerned because sales have been plummeting. On the other hand, sales of fish have been increasing because of all the benefits of the omega-3 eggs, or of the omega-3 fats. So the egg manufacturers thought, gee, how can we jump on that bandwagon? How can we get some omega-3 fats into our eggs? Well, one way of doing that would be to feed fish meal to the chickens, but that has a side effect of making the eggs fishy. Then they thought, gee, well, flax seeds contain omega-3 fats, so why don't we feed those to the chickens? Indeed, that will increase the level of omega-3 fat in the egg, although, as I mentioned earlier, that omega-3 fat is not as biologically active as the one that you find in fish, but it's better than nothing. Of course, it also begs the question of why go through the middleman? Why go through the chicken? Why not just eat the flaxseed directly, which can easily be done? The amount of omega-3 fats that gets into the egg through flaxseed, in fact, is not very much. And if you're just eating a few eggs a week, it doesn't matter if they're omega-3 or not. And if you're eating enough eggs that the amount of omega-3 fat would make a biological difference, then you're eating too many eggs because of the cholesterol content. So why go through the middleman? Why not eat the flaxseed? And it's not hard to do. You can make bread with flaxseed. You can even make bagel with flaxseed. And for those of you who might not know, Montreal is the mecca of bageldom. We have the best bagels in the world. They're not just bread with holes in them like they are in many other places. They have a very distinct taste. And in Montreal, you can even get flaxseed bagel. Why? Of course, capitalizing on Dr. Thompson's study that I mentioned with flaxseed, you can make a bagel with 20 grams of ground flaxseed in it. And that's an impressive amount, because those are the kind of amounts that have been shown to have an effect on breast cancer in the studies that I refer to. Of course, it makes the bagel inedible, but that's a different part of the story. The nice thing about bagel is that you can eat the whole thing. Why do I say that? Because, of course, they have a cousin, which is the donut. And in that case, we should restrict ourselves to just eating the whole. Why? Because, of course, these are laden with fat, and generally the wrong kind of fat. And we know what that can do to us. I mean, we have animal studies that show that you feed them these kind of things, they balloon up. And we have, of course, the empirical evidence that humans who eat a lot of these kind of foods tend to expand their waistline as well. Why? What's going on with these donuts? Well, we can actually see how they are made. If you've ever been to one of these emporiums where they show you how the donuts are made, usually behind a plastic shield. I don't know why they do that. If I were making donuts like that, I'd want to hide the operation. But they do show it to you. And you can see the donuts kind of floating by in the hot fat. And then they go under the glazer where they get coated with another layer of fat and sugar. And then you have practically a heart attack on a plate. And you can imagine that the fat that is used to make these donuts is the notorious trans fat. Why do they use trans fats? Well, because they're very stable so that the oil doesn't break down easily, although of course there is a movement now to get rid of the trans fats, and there has been a lot of success, and of course we will refer to that later on as well. The main problem with trans fats is that it raises blood levels of cholesterol. And that has become a very, very worrisome word. I mean, even people who have no idea what cholesterol is want less of it in their life than more. And you may remember a few years ago when scientific studies showed that oat bran, which is the outer covering of the oat grain, could lower cholesterol levels. Boy, that really hit the headlines. Up to that time, oat bran used to be common animal feed. They couldn't get rid of it. So it was used as horse feed. But now it was found to lower human blood cholesterol levels. They put it on our breakfast plates. What did that leave for the horses? Well, they were eating our sugar-laden cereals, while hopefully we were benefiting from the oat bran, and oat bran mania was underway. We wanted oat bran anywhere. If it was in dirty potato chips, fine, didn't matter. If we could only somehow squeeze more oats into our life, we were happy. But here was the problem. And again, this is something that we're going to refer to continually in this course. Very few people asked the right question. Very few people asked about numbers. That is, if you eat oat bran, how much of it do you have to eat in order to have an effect on your cholesterol? Well, let's try to answer that question. The active ingredient in oat bran that lowers cholesterol is soluble fiber called beta-glucan. You have to eat quite a bit of this in order to have an impact on your blood cholesterol level. You have to eat about 3 grams of beta-glucan a day. Now, that doesn't mean very much. We have to ask the question, how much oat bran do you have to eat in order to have 3 grams of beta-glucan? Well, it turns out that it's about a cup of cooked oat bran. It's doable, but those of you who have tried know that it's somewhat of a challenge to eat a cup of cooked oat bran. This is not one of God's gifts to the palate. But you can dress it up by putting fruit in it or applesauce. Indeed, it is doable. But you can also get 3 grams of beta-glucan from muffins. Well, muffins do contain the oat bran, but they also contain a lot of fat. So you don't want to be eating 3 to 5 muffins a day in order to get your beta-glucan. You can, however, eat oatmeal. 1.5 cups of oatmeal is certainly doable, and it can have a significant impact on your blood cholesterol. both because it contains the beta-glucan and because it is substituting for something that you're not eating, like the Danish or the bacon and eggs. So this really is a very, very good breakfast. Once again, though, advertisers sometimes try to stretch the truth. For example, General Mills discovered that the O in Cheerios stands for oat bran when all of these studies came out. Well, yeah, the O is also pretty close to zero, which is the amount of oat bran that you get in one serving of Cheerios. In fact, you'd have to eat about 5 servings of Cheerios to get your 3 grams of beta-glucan, and that would be a challenge. And not particularly great nutritionally because of the sugar content that you would be getting along with it. So numbers in science are very, very important. It's not just a question whether or not a nutrient or indeed some potential toxin is there. The question we always have to ask is how much of it is there and how are we exposed to it? Because eating something is quite different from handling it or from inhaling it. Toxicology and nutrition are very, very complex areas of study, but hopefully we'll be able to simplify them for you.